In this video, we're going to create a rust material. Now, before we get started on the rust, I just made a few changes here to our base painted material. So here for the color variation 2, I actually just went back and just made an adjustment here to the color. So I just chose a different color. And then here for my paint specs on that fill where we had a grunge map, I changed that from black and white spots 1 to black and white spots 2. So just a small change there. Now, right before we get started on the rust, I want to finish up one last thing here on this material. So what I'm going to do is create a new fill. The channels here, I'm going to disable everything except for color. So this is going to be another color variation. And so here, let's just call this, this will be color var underscore 3. All right, so we're going to leave it at white for now. We'll come back to this in a minute. So let's right click here and create ourselves another black mask. Now here, I'm going to go to my effect, I'm going to add a generator. Now this time I'm going to use this light generator. So we'll enable this guy. And here you can see that we have this horizontal and vertical angle. So I'm just going to switch the vertical angle to 270, which is going to give me the effect of some accumulation here on this top slope here, as well as here. So with this, we can also change some things like our highlight glossiness. So let me just make a few adjustments to this and my light attenuation. So we'll just back it off a little bit. So here we go. We're going to do something like this. Okay, so this is kind of our base start. Now what I want to do is add a fill to this, and I'm going to modulate this light generator with another grunge texture. So with our fill, let's come over here to our grayscale. Let's click this button. And I think what I'll do, here you can see my mini shelf. I'm just filtering based on the grunge keyword once again. And I'm going to use this grunge concrete old. So we'll use this. Here you can see we have our seam, of course. So we want to switch our projection mode here to triplanar. And so now that we have that set, let's come over here to the blending mode for this fill. And I'm going to set this to multiply. So now we have this type of effect that you see here. Okay, so the next stage of this, let's go back here to our color and let's start to play around with the color. So here I can just hit my material tab just to focus just on the material and the channels. So let's bring up our color picker and let's start to pick a color value. So let's see here. Let's try to find something that we think might work for what we want to do. Let's try maybe something like this. And then here for the blending mode, I might play around with some of these. Let's try something like value. Okay, so I think I might like this. Now, maybe it's a bit intense, so let's just come over here to the opacity here for the color. Now, again, notice that here in my channel selector, I'm at base color, which means that the opacity that I'm setting is for the channel that is stored within this fill layer. So I'm just going to lower the opacity value here until I get something like this. So once again, we just have another level of color variation here to this. And with each of these color layers that we have, again represented by our color channel here on these fill, we're just basically doing some optical color mixing here. So we have the masks, which are allowing us to blend all of our colors together with all of these detailed grunge maps that we've been working with. Again, this entire time we're keeping everything procedural. So of course I can always come back and just easily change these color values to, whatever I want without much effort whatsoever. Okay, so one last thing I want to do here on this mask is I want to just further break up this final layer of color variation. And I'd like to try to focus these kind of highlighted colors more into some of these occluded areas. So a quick way to do that would just be to create another generator here. And for this one, I'm just going to use MG Dirt. And here we can see that if we increase our dirt level, you can see that we're starting to get, here, let's look at it in mass mode. So in these areas where we have some kind of occlusion areas, here in this area you can see as well, it's kind of building up. And so what I'm going to do with this, now that I have this MG Dirt, is I'm just going to set the blending mode here to multiply. So now this is really what we're getting here for this mask. So I'll hit M on the keyboard to go back to my full material mode. And now we can just play around just a little bit here with this dirt level. Let's increase our grunge amount, maybe even our contrast here. So we'll back it off just a little bit on the dirt level and get something like this. So again, it's just a subtle color variation, and we're using this MG Dirt to help concentrate this color more into areas here under these kind of occluded spots like this. Okay, so now that we have this in place, we're now ready to start working on our rust material. So to create this rust material, I'm going to use some external resources. So I'm going to use some rust textures that I have as part of my texture library, and I want to import these into Painter so that I can apply them as maps on a fill layer. So to do that, we're going to open up our shelf. So let's come over here to the dock, and I'll click this button here, and we can just expand this shelf window. And here you can see that I have this button here for importing resources. Now I can also get to this at the top of the UI if I just go to File, Import Resources here. It's going to do the same thing, but let's do it here from our shelf. So again, we're going to click this Import Resources. It's going to open up this Import Resources dialog, and we can use this Add Resources button to add any content that we need. So here I'm going to click the Add Resources button, and here in the project files you'll notice I have this Rust folder. So let me just open this up, and here I have a couple maps. Now this is a texture that I created using our bitmap to material. So basically just downloaded a Rust texture that I found online and then ran it through bitmap to material to create some tiling textures. So for instance, here I have a base color, so we'll select this. I created an ambient occlusion, and then I also have this height. So I'm going to use these three maps. Now I'll click Open to import these here into the Resources dialog. Now you'll notice here that we have our textures, and then over here on the far right we have these little boxes here that say Undefined. Now the way the shelf system works here inside of Substance Painter is we use a filtering system based on tags or keywords so that you can quickly navigate and organize content that you have here on your shelf. You've seen me kind of go through that when I've been opening up that mini shelf and searching for grunge or procedural, and then the shelf kind of filters based on those keywords. So here, when we import resources, we can create keywords or tags. So what I'm going to do is use the Shift key and then left click all of these items here. This selects everything at once so that I can edit all of these items at the same time. And then here, I'm going to click this Undefined button, and that's going to give me a couple options. So these are reserved keywords that the shelf uses to organize content. And since I've imported in a texture format, a texture can be either an alpha, a colored LUT, an environment texture, or just a plain texture. And here in this case, I want to use it just as a texture. So I'm going to choose the texture category. Now here, towards the bottom, we have this Import Your Resources To. And this drop-down has current session, which means the current session that Painter's open in. So we can import these resources just for this current session. We can import these resources to our project, which is our lantern project, or we can choose to import these resources into our shelf so that these resources are available in any project that we create. In my case, I'm just going to save these here to the project lantern. Now, one other thing I can do here is I could set up an optional prefix path. So I'm going to click in this field, and I'm just going to give this a tag of Rust. So this is allowing me to kind of create my own tag or keyword, we'll say. So now that I have this set, I'm going to click Import. And now here in my shelf, you can see that here we have this import tag, which is representing imported resources, and here I have these resources. So for example, if I come back over to my shelf and I select the All button here, this is now just filtering everything that's in the shelf. So we have everything. Now, within this, if I come over to this search field and I start to type in that keyword I set, which is Rust, you can see that all of the items that have a Rust keyword are going to show up here for me. So here I have another texture that I'd opened, but here I have the textures that I imported in just moments ago. Now, if I want to get more specific about this filtering, you can see that here I have textures, I have some grunge maps, I have some materials and generators, but maybe I just want to look at a texture type. So I can use Rust, which is the name that I gave it, my keyword tag, and then I can also use the tag of texture. So now this is going to filter assets that have the word Rust in them, such as this texture, or assets that have the keyword prefix that I set, which is Rust, and are of type texture. So in that case, I only have 4 results. All right, so now we've imported our assets here into the shelf. So let me just close this guy. We're not going to use it for now. A good best practice here is to organize these layers. So let's do that now. So here you'll notice that I have this folder group here. I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to name this. I'm going to call this Painted Metal. And then I'm going to just shift left select all of the items and then just simply left click and drag and drop them here into my folder group. So now I can just collapse everything, and now we have just our painted metal. Now that we have this, we can also save this as what's called a smart material. So if I right click this Here you'll notice in my menu I have this option to create a smart material. So I'm going to do that now. So I've done that, but well, we don't have our shelf open. So let me go back here to our shelf. So we'll open this guy up. And then here you can see underneath smart materials, here is our painted metal that we've been working on so far. And it gets saved as this smart material. So now I can just left click and drag and drop this back here into my layer stack. So here, let's close our shelf. Here's our painted metal. What's really great about these smart materials is if I expand them, you can see that all of our layers are completely intact. So for example, if we go to our color variation 1, I come over here to my mask, you can see that I have my mask editor and I have full control over everything that we've worked with. And we call these smart materials because you'll notice that the baked maps are going to be automatically set depending on what texture set you drag this smart material into. So we'll see this in action a bit later on. For now, let's just go back to this painted metal that we've imported in and let's just delete it. All right, so now that we've done all that, we can finally get to the part of actually creating that rust material. So let's begin that work. So here in our layers, I'm going to come over and I'm going to create this fill. And once again, I'm going to just kind of go with that same nomenclature of starting with just the base. So this is going to be our base. And so here, we'll just navigate here to our channels, and I'm going to be working with color, height, and roughness. Metal will turn this off, normal will turn this off, and here you'll notice that I actually have AO already enabled. So just to make sure I don't skip anything, one of the things that I've done here, let's go and take a look at this channel. So if for this layer stack, if we come over here to the texture set settings, you can see that underneath our channels, I've added this ambient occlusion. So here, if we just delete it, so we'll remove that guy. If we come back to this plus button, actually, so it doesn't get cut off in the screen capture, let's just drag this texture set over here. Let's click this plus button. You can see that we have ambient occlusion as a channel. So as soon as I add that, you'll notice that ambient occlusion is here. And then on a fill layer, this channel is now available to us as well. So that's where that's coming from. All right, so now we have base color, height, roughness, and ambient occlusion. And with these buttons, we can click these guys here, and it's going to pop up our mini shelf, and we can start to place these textures that we've imported into these channels. So again, we know that we can just simply filter this by typing in rust, and then I'll type in texture, and now here we have this filtered. So for the base color, I want to use this base color map, so I'm going to left click to add this. Let's do the same thing here for our height. So we'll just click the height button, and here I'm going to choose the height texture. And then finally for the ambient occlusion, we'll click the ambient occlusion, and here we'll choose the ambient occlusion. All right, so now that we have that set up, we're going to go back here to the properties for our fill, and we're going to change this projection mode again. So we're going to switch this from UV projection to triplanar. Now before I do that, I want to show you here, again, we have some pretty nasty seams here at these discontinuous edges. So again, we switch this to triplanar, and those seams are going to go away. All right, so now that we have that in place, we can come in here to our UV scale, and we can start to just tile this. And you can see that we're also getting this bump information. So if I move my light so we can really see it, we're getting this kind of bump information here from that height texture. Now I actually had a roughness map that I could use, and if you would like to do that, you could import that in. It's in the project files. But in my case, I thought I didn't really need it. So I'm just going to use this uniform slider and just set this to be pretty rough. So something like this here. All right, so just kind of looking at what we have, let's just play around here with this UV scale. So I think I might try something like this here. Now, in my case, I feel like maybe this height is just a little too intense. So what I'm going to do with the fill layer selected, I'm going to use my drop-down box here to target the height information in this fill. So again, my blending mode changes because height is always using linear dodge. And I'm just going to come into here and just drop that opacity. So if I drop it all the way to 0, we don't see any height information. So here I'm just going to maybe give it a value of like maybe 23 or so. So something like this. And if I move my light, we can kind of see just a little bit of that kind of bump effect here. Okay, so just like that, this fill layer represents this base layer for our rust. What we've done is we've created a fill, and we've imported textures as external resources, and we're just applying those maps here to the channels. So this is another way that we can map textures to our assets here inside of Substance Painter. So just to keep things organized, what I'm going to do is create another folder here, and we're going to call this rust. And now let's take this base layer here, and let's just drag and drop that here into this rust. So now we have two layers. We have a rust layer, and then we have our painted metal underneath of that. In the next video, we're going to go through the process of masking this rust material to reveal the painted metal underneath.